I remember even in dating, like I was waiting for the right person to show up. That's the external locus of control versus I am seeing myself in every person and I am in control of my own destiny and my choices, and my ability to have a healthy relationship is within me. And that's such an empowering place to be. And if it's out there, it is, you do feel helpless. Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Deborah Barrett-Maldonado. I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado, and we're here continuing our series on the great minds of psychology. This series has been so popular that actually our downloads have doubled since we entered this concept and this topic. So keep listening. We have much more to go. But before we begin today on our topic of social psychology, we are going to request that you please subscribe to our channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, click here in the button below. There's a button that says subscribe. Make sure you click that and also hit the bell for the notifications so you can get binged and pinged when a new episode arrives every week. Also, if you are listening to us on a podcast service, iTunes, Spotify, and those other wonderful podcast services, please be sure to subscribe because this series is juicy, juicy, juicy. All right, Rob, social psychology. What does that mean? And why do we need to understand that?
Yeah, so let's put it in context. We started out talking about some of the psychodynamic models and people that were important in that school. Anna Freud, Marie von Franz. Then we went into Maslow and Carl Rogers, the humanist.
Erik Erikson,
the developmentalist, who was also part of the kind of psychodynamic school that came out of Freud and Jung, as well as Skinner, the behaviorist. Very different ways of seeing the mind. And
we also talked about that, how psychology started in Europe and then America or the West brought the United States, the Americans kind of wanted to put their own spin on it and make it more scientific. And so Skinner arrived at those experiments and then how that's always been kind of a unhidden battle of between, what is the best psychology. And really, truly, psychology is a science. So we're not trying to say one is better than the other, but we build upon it as we keep learning and growing. And with different perspectives, we start to see a holistic view of humankind and our human mind versus just a fixed view. And this is the way it is and we can never change. And so that's really a true science, not this is fixed and this is the way. It's more like, well, what about this theory and what about that theory? And then they build upon each other. And even now, as coaching becomes more popular, it's borrowing a lot of what we learned in psychology, but it's like, how do we use this in a coaching model? So it's evolving the human development into a new era in our future.
Yeah, I think of it as a library, and these people are contributing their thoughts, their ideas, their books to the library. So the richer it becomes, right, through this adding of different models, different ways of seeing the mind and human behavior. So it's a continuing process, absolutely. We want to contribute by applying what we've learned from these great minds in a coaching model and saying, instead of waiting for people to have midlife crises or fall into depression or anxiety, why don't we give this incredible knowledge to people that are ready to transform their lives, to solve human problems, to go to optimal functioning.
In an empowering way.
In an empowered way, yes.
Yeah.
So let's start then into social psychology. So here now, kind of on the heels of Skinner, and you saw the humanists kind of react to Skinner and say, let's take a more humanistic approach. Out of that kind of response as well to Skinner and to even the humanist and even Freudian psychoanalysis, the social psychologists were more interested in looking at the mind and human behavior in a social context. In other words, we're
not an island. No man's an island kind of idea. That
exactly.
We don't act. And we live in a family system. We live in a school system, a public system, friendships, a cultural system, and we can't ignore all that.
Yeah, we evolved from Darwin. We see that we evolved as small groups, small tribes, kind of communal living, and everything you see, language, human culture,
Rituals,
human cities, villages, everything that humans express is done in the context of society, of social groups.
even they find these ancient cities that they had a structure. We went to Pompeii on our honeymoon, and they had they had the baker, and they had the rich families and the mansions, and they had the slaves, and then all this very evolved culture living in this place. And we think, oh, that's just the modern life, but we've had it for centuries. We've been living this way, and millions of years, obviously.
Yeah, and so our perspective is we want to look at these findings from social psychology in the context of now. Now we are in a very different point in history. Now we're developing artificial intelligence, and the planet is kind of in urgent need of our attention. So we have very different human problems that impact everyone on the planet.
Well, if we think about AI and its impact on human growth, and you say climate change, but also just a lot of political upsets all over the world, not just in the U.S., but there's a lot of conflict happening politically, and it's feeding people, and just so many human problems, and we can't solve them with one person. We have to look at society and how it moves, and it doesn't move in like a single person. It can impact a society, but the society has to go along with that to create change.
Yeah, so the social psychologists are important in this regard because they precisely focused on these kind of questions. How does the individual influence the group, and how does the group influence the individual, right? And facing these human problems, we have to understand a little bit more of what happens, right? When we developed the social media, it amplified our social needs, in positive and negative ways, right? It allows us to create community. We communicate with people from all around the world through Zoom and have these conversations on a daily basis.
Well, even these podcasts, they have access to teachings from thousands and thousands, millions of people, millions of podcasts, and have information at your fingertips.
At the same time, we know they're causing a lot of pain and suffering for young people with eating disorders because they're looking at images of models that are unrealistic.
Well, even the influencers, they rent out a mansion and they make it seem like that's their lifestyle, and they're not working, and they're having all this like their persona, and then people are like, I want to be like that person, this following this like not real experience that they're having. But also too, teenagers really wanting those likes. I can't imagine being in school right now, in high school or junior high, and having Facebook. We didn't have that back then, to have to uphold this persona, and then have how many followers do you have, and it's more than just when we were growing up, like how many friends do you have and who are you friends with, and how do people like you. Like, it's such a small thing compared to what's out there now, which is this, like, the world is judging you. And,
we're in this kind of time period of disruption where technology moves so fast and new things come along so fast that people don't have time to adapt, and it just disrupts a lot of the social structure that's been built and that people used to depend on. So some of these social theories, let's look at them and then think about how we can apply them, especially in coaching, and how they can serve us to help solve some of these human problems. So one of the most influential social psychologists was Albert Bandura. In 1963, he came up with this social learning theory. So social learning theory really kind of critiqued some of Skinner's work. Skinner had said,
how do people get conditioned? Right?
Yeah, Skinner kind of postulated that we, through our own behavior, operant conditioning is molding our behavior in a very clear and precise way. Now, there is some evidence that that's true, but Bandura set up these experiments where children were simply observing adults act in a certain way. So,
so instead of like Skinner's idea, just to make it clear, that his was the action has a reaction and that conditions you, like you're the one taking the action. Where Bandura took it to, if you witness an action, you can be conditioned by others, like authority figures too, and like role models.
Yeah, I don't think he'd call it conditioning. He'd call it learning.
Learning,
that you learn by observing, by observation of others. So that if you see somebody touch a hot stove, you do not yourself have to go and touch the hot stove to learn that it's hot, that you shouldn't touch it. That the child or anyone can learn, but simply by observing someone else get hurt by touching the hot stove.
Would that be similar? I heard of the 100 monkey syndrome, where one monkey, they taught him how to wash the fruit, and then he taught another monkey, and then all of a sudden all the monkeys started washing their fruit. Would that be something similar, like you're watching a behavior and then you adopt it?
Yes, but I think in those observations, they observed that monkeys weren't necessarily observing.
They were doing it too.
That simply if one troop of monkeys started doing that, then other troops of monkeys in another location started to do it.
So it's like a different, but it's still based a little bit on this. It's like you follow the group and then there's a mass shift in consciousness. Okay. So yeah, let's talk about his group, because I think this doll experiment is really interesting.
Yeah, so here we go. Bandura introduced the notion that behavior in the social world could be modeled. Modeling, we know, is used in education a lot still today. 3 groups of children watched a video where an adult was aggressive towards a doll, a Bobo doll. It's one of these, they used to have these toy clowns that were heavy.
Plastic,
it had sand on the bottom, and so it stood up when inflated. But if you hit it, if you pushed it over, it would just kind of bounce back. And so the kids were watching videos of some adults interacting with this Bobo doll, and some of them were punching
and the other
doll.
ones were hugging them, right? Or something.
Or just kind of playing around with them. And the adult was either just seen to be doing this, was rewarded by another adult for their behavior, or was punished for it.
Wow. So you're watching someone get punished or rewarded for that behavior.
That's right. So children who had seen the adult rewarded were found to be more likely to copy such behavior. So here was evidence, and of course he did different experiments, not just these, that supported the idea that we as human beings learn from watching other human beings, and the reward or the punishment that other human being gets.
Oh, okay. So it was not just watching, but that reward and punishment that they got from the behavior. So if, let's say someone was like rude and angry all the time, like a boss, let's just say you go into a corporation and your boss is like yelling at people and being aggressive, and then he kept getting promoted. And then people watching that going, oh, being a tough and aggressive equals, so then he starts being tough and aggressive to his or her subordinates to get the promotion. Would that be something like that? Like you're thinking, well, that's the way to behave.
That's right.
And believe me, I've been in those situations, but that's like, you have to be tough and you got to be hard on people to get results. And that was kind of an old school way, and then passed on. Or even teachers, like in Catholic school, the nuns would hit the kids if they got the lessons wrong, or, the corporal punishment. And so kids learned not to, maybe aggressive, doing aggressive, it kind of was filtered throughout the whole school system.
Yeah, so if you think about our social context, everything happens in society in groups, right? We go to school with our peers and we hang out in these groups, and we're always observing. If another kid acts a certain way, what happens to them? Does the teacher praise them, or does the teacher humiliate them or send them to the office? We learn just from that observation. We don't have to experience it ourselves.
So let me put it a positive way. Let's say you have a mother that is selfless, and that she was always rewarded because everyone loved her because she was so selfless. And so you would adopt that. I think there's also the genetic components and all that, but you adopt that because you think when I'm pleasing people, there's no conflict and people are nice and they like me. And so you would take that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So not just being angry, but being the opposite, like you're rewarded for being kind. And then you aren't able to be hard or keep boundaries because you're rewarded for being kind.
Right. This is also, notice that it's not contradicting psychoanalytic theory, which says the impulse is coming from you individually and then you manage it and either suppress it or express it. It's saying the social context of what you've learned and experienced through observation is much more influential from this perspective. In this model, social learning theory says you can account for human behavior more by understanding what the social circumstances that an individual grew up in to account for their behavior.
So would it be gangs too, like people that get into gangs and the leader of the gang praises them for doing something terrible and then they all think, well, that's the way you get rewarded, and they question, they're not like thinking for themselves basically.
That's part of the implications. It has all kinds of implications, of course, for human behavior, right? Criminals that end up in jail. We can essentially say from this learning model that any one of us under those circumstances and observing what they observed would act the same way, right? So it gets to the question of responsibility. Is the individual really responsible for their actions, or are they a product of their social conditioning, their social learning?
So if they're taught to be racist or talk bad about certain people and they get like praised from it because maybe everyone in the culture is like, yeah. And then you end up repeating that pattern because you see that there's a benefit to doing so.
That's right. Now for coaching, on the creative end, right? We know mentoring is very powerful.
Yeah.
Why do some people succeed? They have great mentors.
Meaning good role models, right?
Yeah, they're observing. The mentor is modeling successful behavior, and then the mentee is taking notes and saying, oh, I want to do that. I want to be like that.
I want to act like, well, like Think and Grow Rich, and Napoleon Hill interviewed all these wealthy people and asked, and of course, the thing I don't like about it is just all men. There wasn't a woman interviewed in there, but it was, all about how do they think and understanding how to model what they did and how they think.
Absolutely.
Or is this social learning more about just watching the behavior versus watching the thinking?
No, it's just a social context. In other words, we're picking up stuff continuously. We're observing and we're trying and mimicking, and that's a way of learning. Essentially, that's what he's saying, that we learn our behavior in a social context.
This reminds me of that movie, the Catch Me If You Can, that a true story about the guy who's Leonardo DiCaprio played. I forgot the guy's name. He was the check wrote checks and flew in the plane, and kind of a fraudulent guy. Well, his father was a con. And so the con father was like training him and basically saying he was watching and modeling he was modeled after his father. And so he learned by witnessing his father's behavior, getting, like the woman, getting the sexy woman and getting all these like benefits from being a con, that he took it on himself.
Yes. Absolutely.
But there's also the genetic component too. We don't want to ignore that if it's a modeling from someone in your family, you're more likely to exhibit some of those personality traits too.
Yeah, again, these are different models. So a model takes a certain worldview, a certain perspective on behavior. And the question for models is this: can we predict, can we account for what the observation of the behavior is through that model?
Oh, okay.
In other words, can we account for good behavior and bad behavior, success and failure through social learning theory? Yes, we can, right? It has strong evidence. Is it absolute? Of course not. It has its weak points and it has some exceptions and things like that.
Human beings are all unique, but in general, we are wired pretty much the same way. So
that's right. So the institution of teaching, based on social learning theory, right? You get a group of children and you put them all together and you teach them How do you teach them? By modeling. In other words, you show them how to solve a math problem, and then they mimic it.
Well, isn't it religion too?
Of course.
The model that the priest or the guru says models the perfect way to be, to go to heaven or reach enlightenment.
So teaching, training, coaching, mentoring, all those fall on this kind of, or under this umbrella of social learning theory. Very powerful.
So let's move on. You have a lot more to cover. So
So most of you have heard of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is kind of a fancy term, but what is it? How can we explain it in a simple way? I have a personal story.
Okay.
I knew this friend of mine. He became a yogi. I actually met him in a yoga class. So he was a yogi and became a strict vegetarian. I don't think he was a vegan. He was a vegetarian. His family had to kind of had this family business. And then during my association with him, his father passed on and he inherited a butcher shop. Now here you have a vegetarian, strict vegetarian, devoted to his lifestyle of yoga and vegetarianism, inherit a butcher shop, which is
lacks of all vegetables.
And the slaughtering of animals, of course, something which was contrary to his beliefs, lifestyle, values. What that causes, that mismatch of having to deal with this phenomena or this experience, that causes cognitive dissonance. It's an uncomfortableness, an unease with complying with what the situation calls for. He couldn't very well throw away the family business.
So it's like a conflict, right? The inner conflict.
Yes, a type of inner conflict or
but
a mismatch.
He's conscious of it, right?
Yes, a mismatch between the individual's values and the thing that he has to comply with.
I see this a lot too with people that are coaches or healers, and they're out there trying to make a living, and they have this kind of spiritual idea that money's bad. And so they have that asking for money. There's a cognitive dissonance to asking and raising your rates, and can I only help rich people? And I want to help everyone. And then they end up having this conflict with what they believe is to be a good person and to be a business person and actually have income and grow, your revenue. And there's like a cognitive dissonance between spiritual work or helping work and being a business person.
Yeah. The founder of Whole Foods, I heard him speak once, and he was saying that business has such a bad rap, a bad name in today's society, right? People think of business and they think that's a bad person.
They're business oriented.
Right.
They're out to like cheat the world or, like get the profits and hurt everyone else. Yeah.
So that often causes this cognitive dissonance for people that are helpers, right? They want to help, but because they have to structure a business or orient themselves in a business way, it causes cognitive dissonance for them. Yes.
And then they end up just doing everything for free and never being able to leave their day job because they're not thinking like a business person. And how do I create profit and look at my expenses and see what I need to charge so I can be successful?
Yeah, so this idea was developed by Festinger in 1950. Another social psychologist, Tajfel, came up with social identity theory.
Ooh, that's a big one, especially now.
Yeah, social identity theory, it's really simple but very powerful, and we see it kind of impact a lot of society. It's the idea is very simple. It's that if you organize people in groups and you give them a certain identity, say over here the people that whose favorite color is blue, over here whose favorite color is green. Now you have two distinct groups. What will happen is that the people in the blue group will start to feel differently about the people in the green group.
And then feel more of affinity with their group, even if they disagree with something. So just feel like what's aligned with them.
Yes, they'll start to favor the people in their in group. He called it the in group. And they'll start to disfavor the people of the outgroup.
So this is why a lot of world wars start, religious wars, the us versus them identity groups. I also see this in just even politics, who you vote for, what way you vote, what party you're in. The family groups too, like you're in this part of the family, you're this way, and then there's the other family, the in-laws type of thing, right?
Yeah, I remember when we were teenagers, the Friday night footballs.
Oh yeah,
football games. Some of our friends would say, let's get together and go fight the town that we're playing this Friday. They were just against them. They didn't know who they were, right? They were just the outgroup.
Yeah.
And so they became the enemy.
Like the gangs are based on that too. Yeah. I grew up in New Jersey, so it was, are you a Jets fan or a Giants fan or a Yankee fan or a Mets fan? It was like, we live in the same area, but you're very divided if your loyalty to your team. And I think politics has turned into that, where everyone's on their team, and it's hard for people to talk because you're so aligned with your group, you don't get to hear what the other person says or have compassion for what the other people think. And it's this kind of division, us versus them.
Us versus them. That's a good way to put it. And it's totally arbitrary, but it becomes so important to people that they only identify with members of their in-group and demonize members of the out-group.
I know. It's like that. Yeah. The kind of putting them down, not just demonizing them, minimizing the other group too.
Dehumanize them.
Or the dehumanizing what so happened in the Holocaust, right?
Yeah, exactly. Not only the Holocaust. In all wars, the soldiers are conditioned to dehumanize the enemy because it makes it easier for them to follow orders and commands. And
like, look what's happening in Ukraine with all the children, blowing up a children's hospital and with pregnant people. Like, it just doesn't make sense, but then they're not real people because they're on the other side and they're conditioned to see us versus them. Like, they're bad. And also it doesn't hurt. It's impacted by a lot of propaganda and all that. That kind of feeds that group, those group identities. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Another one.
Attribution theory. This guy named Weiner in 1986. So attribution theory is really powerful and is still used and very useful to us in coaching. It essentially says that the individual either has an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. Locus meaning the position. Where is the control? Externally or internally? Mm-hmm. So in either success or failure, the person that has an external locus of control will say, I failed or succeeded because of external circumstances. The circumstances, the opportunities, the lack of opportunities, whatever it was external.
The economy,
to me.
the no one wants my services, no one's buying this product anymore. Or yes. I'm successful because so many people are looking for this thing. So it depended on some external need by the public that would drive commerce.
In other words, they attribute their results, success or failure, to external circumstances in the external locus of control. Internal locus of control individuals say, I'm responsible. If something happens, it's because I had a part in it, or the majority of the either guilt or praise belongs to me. So
if you run a company and you have the external locus of control, you will think that the reason why things aren't working is because some like even your team or your or the suppliers, the contractors, the software, whatever it is like causing the disruption or lack of failure or success. But when you have an internal locus of control, that's, I think, the most empowering, because as a leader, you have to have that internal. So then that passes down to each person on the team. They also have an internal locus of control. And they start to see that what they do in their mind has power versus what's going on in the environment, what is going on in the financial situation in the country. Is there a recession? Is there not? We start to look at what is happening and we take responsibility.
Yeah, and people, of course, with the external locus of control, in uncertain times have a lot more difficulty adapting and being okay, because if it's out of their control, it feels really scary, right? They fall into this idea of learned helplessness.
Yeah. Because if you don't have that internal locus of control, you're just waiting for the economy to get better. You're waiting for something to happen. I remember even in dating, like I was waiting for the right person to show up. That's the external locus of control, versus I am seeing myself in every person, and I am in control of my own destiny, and my choices and my ability to have a healthy relationship is within me. And that's such an empowering place to be. And if it's out there, you do feel helpless. You feel like the stars have to align, or, you have to be in the right alignment and energy to have the things you want. And that's very external. It's like there's energy out there that I have to tap into to get that, versus I am the energy. I am in control.
And finally, Stanley Milgram in 1963 came up with a shock experiment. This is they've even made movies of his work, and there's some videos that we'll try to post links to some of these theories and experiments. But Stanley Milgram, interesting guy. He was at Yale and developed. This is coming kind of after World War II, of course, after people had gone through the terrible situations of World War II.
Well, it was actually specifically the trial of one of the German generals, and he said, was he a victim of being swept up, was following orders, or can an individual, is he an accomplice? Right. Did he have a conscious choice to make a decision? Did he consciously intend to cause harm? Yeah, that whole idea.
Yeah, so psychologists, social psychologists are looking for experimental ways to test these theories out, right? So is an individual like this war criminal, is he to blame? Is he solely to blame, or is he not at fault because he's following orders? So Milgram set up this experiment where the volunteers would come in and they sat in a booth, and they could hear the other participant who
they thought was a volunteer too.
Who was and they would ask questions of the participant in the
like
other
a quiz,
room,
right?
And when they got the wrong answer, they were instructed to push a button that gave the answer a shock.
And it started like at 100 volts and 250 and 400. And the truth is they weren't receiving the shock, but the person who was asking the question, saw like shock and push it. And then he would hear the other person scream louder the higher the shock came. So it gave them that experience that they were inflicting harm on that other person that I can't see on the other side of the wall. And then in the room was also a guy with a lab coat who was the researcher, and he was the authority figure. And they would look at the authority figure and they would say, well, he's screaming, like, I don't want to, the authority figure would like hit him again. Like, I don't know. And then they would do it because the authority figure said, do it again. And he gave them prompts and kept saying, do it, do it, do it. And so it was really amazing. It was like 80% of the people gave at least the first shock, that they were willing because they were following orders. One of the things about the experiment that I find curious, and they won't do it again because they thought it caused psychological damage on the people that actually experienced it, even though he said he talked to them. And at first they were stressed out about it, but then they were able to, recover pretty quickly. There was no lasting damage, but it were all men that were tested. So there's no idea of whether a woman would act differently. And I would find that curious. I believe the women would be a lower, because of their empathy or something that, I don't know. Maybe I'm putting men in a bucket, but it just would be interesting if women and men would respond the same way. Because men go to war, women want peace.
Well, you might be subject to the social identity
theory. Yeah. Maybe that's it.
That your in-group is better for you than the out-group.
Oh, that's true. I could be looking at it that way. But I would find it curious if women and men would react the same way. And they ended up stopping the experiment because people were starting to get anxious and panicked and having panic attacks over it, and it just didn't. It was at Yale. It was Yale University, and the students were the ones. Oh no, they did an ad, and
yeah, they put an ad out. Yeah, we'll post the link to the movie and to some videos on it.
But what do you think about? What is your takeaway from that?
Yeah, the disturbing results is simply that people are willing to follow and go against their own better judgment, right? Their conscious. Because an authority figure is telling them to do so. I mean, this gets to the idea, right, that if we say, I was simply following orders, we feel that, well, it's not my responsibility. I was following someone else's orders. But what does that mean, right? That you're giving away your will to somebody else, and they are responsible for what you do?
Wouldn't that be similar to also what Jonestown, what happened with what they were handing the Kool-Aid out, and the parents were handing it to their kids to, like, they were just following orders, and it's like, kind of being swept up in, this is what I need to do.
Yeah, it's a very powerful need for us to fit in and to follow the leader. And so if we're not aware of these tendencies, then we fall into these circumstances where we end up doing things against our will and against our better judgment.
So one of the things that they saw in the difference is that when the authority figure left the room, they were less likely to give the shock. But when the authority figure came back in the room, they were like, ooh, I better comply. Another interesting part of this experiment is that when you're put in an unfamiliar environment, like if you're taken out of your environment and moved into a new unfamiliar environment, then you're more likely to follow orders. So the cults that happen, you're taken away from your family, your friends, your whole like conditioning, and you're moved into this new environment. It's like a bubble, and you're more likely to comply than not. And I just find that those things interesting, and I also would be interested to see how women would be, just because of my own social identity theory. But yeah, it's interesting how we act against our own moral actions because it's pressure. It's like peer pressure in a way. That's the term where that comes from. If your friends are jumping off the bridge, are you going to jump off the bridge? My mother used to say that a lot when we were kids.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit different than peer pressure, because peer means someone who's at your same level. This is an authority figure, meaning someone you perceive as above.
Yeah, for the Milgram. But when you think about social identity, it's peers, right?
Yes, and conformity as well. There's studies on conformity where people would actually respond in a wrong way just to go along with the group, with the group consensus.
And I think that this is why individuation is so important, Jung's theory of individuation, because what it's really doing is helping us get out of that conditioning, which is conditioning not only from our personal experience, but cultural conditioning, and even this idea of following the crowd. And like he called it, the herd mentality, and then really thinking for ourselves and having more critical thinking in our decisions, and that's something we have to cultivate. It's something that doesn't happen on its own. We have to cultivate that breaking away of family pressure, cultural pressure, and really start to be our own person. And I think it would be really interesting to see these experiments, maybe not the Milgram, but maybe some of these other experiments, if someone was individuated and someone who hasn't been, someone who's done their shadow work and have a stronger sense of their true self versus someone who's just kind of acting out of their own conditioning. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. We should do some of this.
Maybe we should, yeah. Maybe not so harsh, but just kind of maybe seeing who complies and how that works. But really, truly, if we think about the world, if we want to make a shift in humanity, that's why the social psychology is so important, because we can't just make it on our own. We can't just one person change humanity. We have to inspire. And so the positive part of this is maybe the authority figure is inflicting harm, but what if the authority figure is fostering compassion, fostering love? Like, think about Gandhi and what he did in India about that nonviolent dissidence, right? Nonviolent.
What would it
non-compliance? I forgot what it was called. I was just reading his book, Disobedience. So instead of obedience, we have nonviolent disobedience, which means he didn't go along with the crowd.
Right.
He didn't go along with the English taking over his country, and had to face that, and then making and basically inspiring everyone in his country to take that step and break away, because or else we just comply and say, well, I guess this is how it is. We're all English now, and we're all, have to dress like Westerners, and we have to change our religion and change all these things about our culture. And he said, no, let's embrace who we are and stand for that, which is powerful. And it's going against the tide, which I think that's why it's very, very well needed, because it's so easy to just go with the group. There's no conflict with the go with the flow, and it actually takes courage. It takes discipline. It takes knowing who you are and being self-critical on looking at things on both sides, basically, and making a free decision. That's going to change humanity. And we have a great quote by Margaret Mead to talk about that.
Yeah, because on the positive side, we could not go to the moon on our own. Mm-hmm. It's a group effort. Mm-hmm. We could not build these incredible cities that we live in on our own. It's a group effort. It's a community effort, right? A group effort. We could not do scientific research and solve and find cures and vaccines for some of these medical problems that we have on our own. It's the collective pulling the energy and the ideas together that we're able to solve these bigger problems.
And having mentors in the world, like those of you who are inspired to change the world, to step into mentorships, to step into coaching, to step into leadership, because and be that model and be the change, as Gandhi said. You have to be the change and really dedicate yourself individually to be a force of change, and then people will follow you. People will be led by the light versus the old patterns of our worst tendencies as human beings. What about our best tendencies? What of our potential as human beings? And the best thing you can do for the world is make the most of yourself, and by doing that, you become a model for others. And that's really, and then creating communities of people who are having these conversations, or waking up from social conformity and moving into a state of individual empowerment. And then together we can create a world and shape the world with our locus of control inside, versus the world is creating the circumstances. Like, no, we as a group, we as human beings can shape the world.
Absolutely. And so the quote is by Margaret Mead, who is a cultural anthropologist. She says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." That's very powerful. It really gets at this idea that a small group of people with a powerful idea and a powerful vision, if organized, right, if kind of all pulling in that one direction and one pointed mind, they can make important changes in the world. And so we do not need to despair. All the problems that we're facing in the world, it can be solved, because most of them, we created them ourselves.
And a lot of it is because we just let things happen versus go against the grain and say, hey, there's a better way. And let's be willing, like Gandhi said, be willing to stand in that adversity. And it does take courage. It does take courage. And it's easy to sit back and judge and say, this world is terrible, and that's terrible, and that's terrible. And those people are the ones doing it. But you have to actively be an active participant in the world, and active participant in change. That's really where you feel fulfilled. And even if you're, and it's not like fighting the world, it's like understanding and seeing the world as a reflection of your own mind and having that inner locus of control versus the us versus them mentality. I think that's really important too, because I think a lot of activists, they start to go against the enemy, and what you're really doing is creating more division. And how can we create change with love, compassion, and not be like doormats, but how do we bring that more powerful way to shift the world with new ideas, new innovations, imagination, inspiration?
Absolutely. So there's still a few models and schools and important contributions to be talked about.
Yeah.
So stay tuned. We haven't talked about neuroscience yet. We haven't talked about developmental psychology yet. But these are important ideas that can help us all deal with the complexity of life today and help us solve these human problems.
Yes. So thank you again for joining us. Before you go, don't forget to click subscribe here on the video and subscribe to our channel. We'd appreciate that. Also watching us on iTunes or listening to us on iTunes and Spotify. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast. We appreciate all of you, the new listeners that we're getting. Just an incredible growth we're having on our channel now because of this topic. I think it's just hitting a lot of people where they want to learn more. So we're going to continue this series. We hope you're having a great summer, and we will see you next week.